But then on January, I don't know, 17th or 18th, something like that, Microsoft announced they were going to buy Activision for $95 a share. And they've got the money, and obviously mergers and big mergers, tech companies, all kinds of things, have got all kinds of problems with the world generally in terms of opinion. So you don't know what the Justice Department will do, or you don't know what the EU will do, and there are all kinds of things. The profit is limited. If they say you're going to get 95, you're not going to get 96, and if the deal blows up, you may have a stock that's at 40 or so. It is my purchases, not the manager who bought it some months ago. If the deal goes through, we make some money, and if the deal doesn't go through, who knows what happens.
Well, nothing's a certainty, but with the Federal Trade Commission recently suspending its challenge to block the $68 billion purchase of Activision Blizzard by Microsoft, the market seems to believe that the deal Buffett bet on back in 2022 is increasingly likely to happen towards the back end of this year. The price of Activision shares have jumped up to as high as about $93, pretty close to the $95 that Microsoft offered to buy Activision outright. In this video, let's recap Warren Buffett's initial investment thesis around Activision. We'll also go through some of the latest news around the FTC trying to block the transaction and, what the chances potentially are for the transaction to move ahead now that the FTC have backed off a little. We'll also cover Warren Buffett actually recently selling a pretty large chunk of Berkshire shares in Activision, as well as the returns that Buffett generated for Berkshire shareholders, as well as some of the returns that he potentially missed out on here as well. If you enjoy these types of videos and haven't subscribed to the channel already, please be sure to do so, and thank you to ShareSite for sponsoring the video, but more on that later. Now, as you saw at the start of the video, the Activision Blizzard investment by Buffett and by Berkshire Hathaway wasn't a typical Buffett investment where he's looking to buy shares and hold them for the long term as a company grows and compounds in value. Rather, this particular investment was really a bet on an announced deal or an announced transaction going through. In this case, Microsoft had made an offer of $95 per share to buy out Activision outright, and Buffett was able to buy shares at a significant discount to that $95 purchase price. Now, we don't know the price Buffett paid for his shares precisely, but we do know the rough timing that Buffett bought the shares at, and he also gave us a little bit of commentary at the 2022 Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting around the kind of spread he was looking for between a purchase price and the announced deal price for it to make sense to him as kind of a worthwhile investment. So it's likely that he probably paid about $78 per share would be my rough guess of what he bought his Activision shares for. Obviously, the announced deal price is $95 per share, so in a perfect world, Buffett can buy at $78, have his shares taken away from him by Microsoft at $95, and capture about a 22% gain on the investment. Now, of course, there's always a chance that the deal could fail for a number of reasons, whether it's Microsoft no longer having the money or whether it's regulatory hurdles. So if the deal were to fall over, Buffett would be left kind of holding the bag, holding on to these Activision shares, probably at much lower than the $78 purchase price that he was able to get. Now, there was actually some controversy around Berkshire's initial investment in Activision Blizzard. In late 2021, they initiated a small stake in Activision, which actually wasn't Warren Buffett. It was either Todd Combs or Ted Weschler, one of the other investment managers at Berkshire. And after Microsoft made this offer to buy Activision Blizzard in early 2022, there was a Wall Street Journal article which incorrectly reported some of the facts around Berkshire's investment, and there was a bit of speculation that maybe Berkshire had some sort of inside information about a potential deal in the works. In a somewhat unusual step, Warren Buffett actually put out a press release to kind of set the record straight. If you want to read the full press release, I will link that down in the description below. But Buffett said in here, to sum up the facts, it was about 3 months after our manager's first purchase that Microsoft announced its acquisition proposal, of which Berkshire had no prior knowledge. When Microsoft files its proxy material on its proposed purchase of Activision, I would be surprised if they had even discussed a proposal proposal with Activision in early October, although I do not know. In any event, the investment manager's $77 per share purchase could have been replicated after the Microsoft proposal was announced at a price of $78 or so. His purchase was no bonanza of any sort for him or Berkshire. So after setting the record straight on those initial 14 million or so shares that Berkshire purchased before the Microsoft deal was announced, Buffett, having seen the deal announcement, actually added significantly to the position for Berkshire, this time adding to it with sort of his portion of the Berkshire portfolio, which represents really most of the investments at Berkshire Hathaway. At the peak, Warren Buffett actually purchased as much as 9.5% of the entire Activision Blizzard company, up from about 1.9% from those initial purchases of Todd Combs or Ted Weschler. And like I said before, we don't know exactly the purchase price here for Warren Buffett, but it was likely in the high sort of $70 per share range. So the upside is known here. Buffett, if the deal goes through, could ride the share price from the high 70s, maybe $80, up to the full $95 for a 20% or so gain. The downside here is really the big unknown. My personal speculation was that Buffett felt quite comfortable with the downside, particularly given that one of the other managers at Berkshire, Todd Combs or Ted Weschler, was already buying shares with no sort of knowledge of a potential deal. That suggests to me that someone at Berkshire Hathaway felt that Activision was pretty undervalued and probably a good business anyhow, and that Buffett was likely comfortable to hold on to those shares even if the deal did fall over. But Buffett, of course, has never confirmed that. When he talked about the Activision situation, he was very clearly focused on the probability of, this announced deal going through or not. So what's happened around the Activision deal recently, and what has Warren Buffett been doing with his shares? Well, in early July, a California judge actually denied the FTC's injunction request, which would have potentially stopped the Microsoft deal going through. That was a big step forward for the deal obviously happening. The market reacted very positively and the price leapt up as a result. And just last week, we actually had the FTC suspend its challenge to block the transaction entirely. So again, more positive news for the deal, becoming increasingly likely to go ahead. Now, that doesn't mean that we've completely got a green light here for the transaction to go through. As I record this video, it's not certain, it's not 100% a sure thing that the deal's going to go through, but it does seem to be heading in that direction. There are, of course, other jurisdictions that Activision and Microsoft have to sort of work with regulators in. A key one at the moment is the UK's Competitions and Market Authority. That's an entity that Microsoft is still in active negotiations with, but to make really strong progress in the United States is obviously a big step forward. So what has Warren Buffett been doing throughout this period with his shares via Berkshire Hathaway? Well, like I said, the initial stake from Todd and Ted was about 14.6 million shares, representing about 1.9% ownership of the entire Activision company. When Buffett spoke about the Activision sort of merger workouts back in May 2022, Berkshire had increased its stake right up to about 9.5% of Activision. Now, between May 2022 and today, we've actually seen a couple of times Warren Buffett trim back his ownership in Activision. He sold the stake down to about 6.7% as of February, and his 13F, which would have showed his holdings as of the end of March, showed about 49.4 million shares, or about 6.3% of the company. And in what I thought was pretty surprising news, actually, we saw a 13G filing out of Activision Blizzard and Berkshire on the 17th of July 2023, so very recently, showing that their ownership is now back down to 14,658,121 shares, which I imagine, not a coincidence, is the exact amount of shares that were initially purchased by either Todd Combs or Ted Weschler. So that suggests to me that as of that filing in July, Warren Buffett basically has completely sold his portion of Berkshire's Activision shares, but Ted or Todd, whichever one of those two, bought the initial stake back in late 2021. They seem to be continuing to hold on to their shares. Now, when I first saw that filing, my initial thoughts were basically, okay, the deal looks much more likely to go ahead now, the share price has shot up, and clearly the risk reward has sort of changed here in Warren Buffett's mind, and he's chosen to kind of take the money and run. He's chosen to cash out at $92 or $93 per share and not wait around for the 95. But actually looking a little closer at the filing, sure, the filing came out on the 17th of July, but this actually seems to show us the share count for Berkshire as of the 30th of June, which is actually before the big jump up in price that happened with Activision shares. We obviously don't know for sure, but it looks like something's probably come up in June that Buffett thought meant that the deal wasn't going to go through, and he's chosen to kind of just sell out and move on to other things. But unfortunately for Buffett, it does mean he's missed out on a pretty significant gain. So now that at least the sort of Buffett portion of the investment here in Activision has fully played out, what sort of returns did Warren Buffett actually generate? Well, I've plugged all the numbers into ShareSite, which is the sponsor for this video, but it's been a very handy tool to calculate some of the returns here for Buffett. If you want to check out ShareSite, it's the tool that I use to track my own portfolio as well as do my tax reporting, and you can get 4 months free off an annual subscription using the link sharesite.com/investingwithtom. So definitely check that out if you're interested. There's a free version you can use forever as well. It's a very good tool. But in terms of the returns Buffett likely generated, based off kind of my estimate of his purchase prices and the dates at which he's sold some Activision shares throughout his holding period as well, it looks like he probably generated about a 5% compounded annual return over the period which he held the shares. Now, Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway obviously works with very large sums of money, so that modest sort of 5% compounded annual growth rate is still about $220 million or so in terms of gains for shareholders, but it's well short of the 9% or so return that he could have generated had he held on to the shares for an extra couple of weeks, because a lot of the gain for investors in this situation alongside Buffett has come in just the last couple of weeks. So had he held on, that gain would probably have been more like $400 million or so. Now, in both instances, he's actually performed a little better than the S&P 500 over that same time frame. It's been a lackluster period of performance for the S&P over this sort of holding period of Activision for Buffett. But regardless, unfortunately, he's missed out on that final chunk of gain right before it looks like we get into the finish line with this deal. So that seems to pretty much be where Warren Buffett has landed throughout this Activision Blizzard Microsoft kind of transaction. It's a really interesting case study for me. We haven't seen Buffett do one of these merger workout type bets for a little while. It's something he used to do a lot of back in the 1950s and 60s, is go around and figure out how likely announced transactions are to go through, and potentially from time to time he made really big bets on them. So to see him make a similar kind of bet 50 or 60 years after doing a lot of them back in the day, I think is pretty cool, and it's quite a different style of investment to what we usually see Buffett do. So I hope you enjoyed that recap of the Activision sort of bet here for Warren Buffett. Let me know down in the comment section below why you think Warren Buffett may have sold his Activision shares, unfortunately a little early. If you enjoy these types of videos and haven't subscribed already, please be sure to do so. But that's it from me for this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.